In today's video, I'm going to be talking about how you can communicate with your provider if you're thinking about tapering off your psychotropic medication. Now, I'm going to be going over specifically the all-in-one tool from the Alliance of Benzodiazepine Best Practices, and that's at benzoreform.org. So this all-in-one tool includes 4 steps. Step 1, review and understand the prescriber information pamphlet. Step 2, review and understand the pamphlet communication guide. Step 3, review the pamphlet and communication guide summary. And then step 4, print the prescriber information pamphlet and communication guide summary to prepare you for your appointment. Now, all of these documents are downloadable on the website, and they can also be modified for the antidepressants. However, in step 1, the prescriber information pamphlet is geared more towards benzodiazepines, so instead of handing them that, you can hand them a research article on SSRIs and antidepressant withdrawal, which I'll have a link to Dr. Mark Horowitz's website and his research articles on the topic down in the description. But you could use an article like that to hand to the prescriber in lieu of the prescriber information pamphlet. You could also use the Maudsley deprescribing guideline as a reference or resource to the evidence base on tapering off of your antidepressant or other psychotropic medications. Now, as you're going through all of these steps, you're probably thinking that, is my provider even going to respond? How is my provider going to respond? You're going to have a lot of questions and perhaps a lot of fear going into this when it comes to talking with your provider. And I want to assure you that this is absolutely normal. You might have the fear that they're going to rapidly taper you, that they may suggest you go into a detox, that they may decide not to work with you, or even refuse to renew your prescription. Now, these are all valid fears because this has occurred for some patients. However, if you present the material in a way where you're not putting the provider on the defense, this can go very smoothly and in your favor. Effective patient-prescriber communication requires mutual understanding as well as the commonality of reaching a positive health outcome or positive goal. And in order to obtain this mutual understanding, it's important that when you're going into this, that you're removing emotions from it and you're not going in angry or belligerent, because that's going to put the provider on the defensive right off the bat. Because the goal of this whole process is not to make the provider the bad person or to even make this about you versus the provider. The goal is to establish a collaboration between you and the provider where you can gain their assistance in helping you to taper off and deprescribe your psychotropic medication. So ultimately, you want a partnership with your provider. And now the initial objectives to obtain that goal is to express your concerns about your benzodiazepine prescription, as well as to motivate your provider to read the information and to make a commitment to collaborate with you. So here are some tips to communicating with your provider to make this process as smooth as possible and in order for you to obtain that goal. So number 1 is you want to make sure to tailor your message in the way that your provider thinks or your prescriber thinks. And this is using like the voice of medicine. So talking about when you give them the pamphlet, evidence-based research. That's what they're used to seeing, not I Googled such and such. Then they're going to automatically turn off. So you want to say, I've looked into some evidence-based research, or here's a summary of evidence-based research. Using that term is using the voice of medicine, a term that they're familiar with, so that they can understand that you've actually done your homework and you weren't just Googling around into forums on Reddit and things like that. You also want to be mindful of their time because obviously they're going to be short on time, and also understanding that they may not be aware of the research behind benzodiazepines and the dangers of prescribing benzodiazepines. So when you present them the evidence-based research, you don't want to put them on the defense by saying, you did the wrong thing. Here's all this information I found and everything you did was wrong. You don't want to do that. Here, I found this information on benzodiazepines. I'd like you to review it. Let me know what you think. something like that, to leave it open so that they are not on the defense as you're handing them the information and putting them on that defensive side. So you just want to bring it to them in an objective way, and again, just trying to remove the emotion from it. Which brings us to tip number 2, which is be respectful. So of course, keep your emotions in check. Try to refrain from yelling and getting upset. I know you're probably upset and angry, and it's okay to be upset and angry about your situation, especially if you're in the midst of withdrawal. That can be very uncomfortable and can be very easy for you to get upset, but it's important to avoid getting angry, because again, that's going to put the provider on the defensive side, and we want them on our side, right? We want to have this collaborative relationship with our provider. So try and remain calm as you can as you're providing them with this information and having the conversation with them. It's also important to use we and us and our language so that they understand that you are trying to develop this relationship with them and make them part of the team, make them part of your team. So talking about us and we and together, we decided that clonazepam would be a good treatment, but now I'm starting to see this research online and I came across this evidence-based research. Here's a summary of the research, and I just want to go over it with you because I think I'm experiencing some withdrawal symptoms and I'd like you to help me with coming off of this medication. So what do you think about that? Something of that nature could be the flow of the conversation as you're including them as part of your team, and even including yourself as part of the decision making when it came to maybe getting prescribed the medication. Perhaps when you went in there, you were in such a severe anxiolytic state that you were like, just give me something to help. And he mentioned Klonopin, how it could be very helpful. And you're like, yes, that sounds great. Sign me up. And of course you didn't know these risks, and he probably or she didn't know the risk either, but now here you are. So you're bringing it to them with the intention of saying, hey, we've made this decision. I've realized now after X amount of time that I'm now developing some interdosing withdrawal or some withdrawal tolerance or whatever the symptoms that you are having may be that has brought you to making this decision. You want to make sure that they understand that, and then invite them to be part of your team and the togetherness to help with deprescribing. And now another tip to consider here is going to be using nonverbal cues. And so when I'm talking about nonverbal cues, I'm talking about body language. So when you walk in, that you're not angry and showing like a scrunched up face, or like that you pound on their desk with the paper or something like that, that you go in, you make eye contact, you smile, and then you have the conversation, arms open, not crossed and folded, like all mad and upset sitting in the chair, whatever. You want to, have the presence of being open and having this open relationship and collaborative relationship with the provider. So body language is going to be key here as well. And then the last tip I have about communicating is going to be showing your commitment and having some notes written down. You're going to come in there with the pamphlet, the communication guide, and perhaps a notepad with, your points that you have that you want to make sure that you talk about with your provider. And that may be like the medication you're taking, the dose, along with what are your symptoms that you're experiencing that made you make the decision to want to come off the medication, etc. So just kind of having these points on a piece of paper so that you make sure to cover that with him or her, because it can be difficult in this setting and you don't want to forget anything because maybe you're stressed as you're going into the doctor's office, right? So having your key points written down will not only help you remember what you need to say or the key points, but it also shows your provider that you actually took the time to look this over and bring this to their attention. So it shows your commitment to this whole process. Now, there are some examples in the communication guide and the communication guide summary of how you can approach your provider and have this conversation. However, it's not meant to be a script or taken as a word for word, but just meant for you to help practice this conversation with someone before going in to see your provider, as it can be very stressful to go in to have this conversation with them, and being prepared and having an idea of what you're going to say can be very helpful and relieve some of the anxiety and stress associated with having this conversation. But it is important to note that you shouldn't expect immediate results because oftentimes providers are not going to be aware of these harms of benzodiazepines and are going to need to take the time to look over that provider information pamphlet and look over the information that you've given them so that they can understand better where you're coming from and perhaps do their own research to understand how to even taper you off safely. And so make sure to understand that this is just introducing the topic to them so that they can get on board and understand what's going on. And then perhaps in the next appointment, you guys can have the conversation of what a taper plan will look like. And so just make sure that when you go in that you remember your initial goals: to express your concerns about taking benzodiazepines, to motivate your prescriber to just read that information pamphlet, and request a collaboration of a slow taper of your medication. And so keeping those goals in mind, we're not here to get the home run, right? We're here to get them to understand and identify that there's a problem and that they could be the ones to help you get through this whole taper process. But don't expect for them to start with a taper right away, because it's going to take time for them to understand the process altogether. Now, in the unfortunate circumstance that your provider is dismissive, there are a couple of things in the communication guide that you can say, but if ultimately the provider just denies the whole situation and doesn't want to help you, then you'll need to look for another provider. And for benzodiazepines, there are benzodiazepine cooperative providers listed in the Benzo Information Coalition group, so I'll make sure to link that down in the description. But you can also look for other providers in your area, and when you call them, just get an idea if perhaps they may be able to help you with deprescribing or coming off of your benzodiazepine or other psychotropic medication. So have you had experience with talking to your provider about coming off of your psychotropic medication, and you have any tips you want to share? Leave them down in the comment section below, because we learn from sharing each other's experiences. And as always, I thank you for watching. I wish you well on your mental health care journey, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.